I was intrigued by the difference between restitution and repatriation. And unfortunately, in our language, at least in Ndebele, it's the one word, ubuyisela. Yeah? And whether it's restitution or repatriation, I think in Lesotho it's one word. Ubuyisela. But the difference in this English definition, and unfortunately we need to understand the English definition because those who hold our collections are committed to their own definitions, even if in our languages it's one word. And the term restitution is a process by which cultural objects are returned to a community. But when a nation, when a government goes after those collections that are at the British Library, that process is called repatriation. And the reason they make that distinction is because different laws and instruments govern them. So why restitute? Why should there be repatriation? It's a political, it's a legal, it's an ethical, and also a professional engagement. Essentially, when we talk about restitution, there is a power relation. Usually the one who's powerful has taken stuff away. And the one who's less powerful is saying, please, return our things. And we often ask them to return for different reasons. And the emotion they garner varies whether it's a political reason or an ethical reason or legal reason. But all these things are important in order for us to create a proper framework to receive our things. So we ask that collections are restituted so that they are returned to their rightful owner. Whether we are less powerful or not, whether we are poor, whether we have museums, there are things. They should be returned to the rightful owner. Then the onus is on us as rightful owners to think about how can we store these things for perpetuity for the next generation. And so when we think about the why of restitution, we think about questions also of how did those collections get there? Were they bought, were they sold? Hakuti Morena Mushoshe gifted 500 objects. Really? So if I can talk about restitution, what is often restituted or repatriated? And it's in different ways, different forms. And sometimes it's prioritized as to what quickly gets returned. From what I've seen in the literature and in the reading and seen professionally, the things that tend to be prioritized in the return process are spiritual objects. I've also seen that the return of human remains also happens quickly. If we can say, as happened in University of Cambridge Museum, they found an umbilical cord of Buganda tree. And as Africans we know that those things are very sensitive. And for the umbilical cord to go from Uganda, Kampala, to a museum at the University of Cambridge is shocking, and I can see the shock in the room. How does an umbilical cord? And it was found by a student from Uganda who was on attachment. And how do these repatriations often happen? So I've given a few examples. There are many, but these are examples to help our discussion. There is usually a legal framework that is set, a treaty, an agreement, and government often plays a role in creating that framework. And so it is crucial that as a nation we create a framework for that return. Like government, as activists we can do our part, as universities we can do our part, as a private church, private, standing alone archives, and we can do our part. But government needs to set up a legal framework that will enable us to do this work. In the absence of a legal framework, we could also utilize regional frameworks where they exist. Mm-hmm. It is important for us as a nation to, and as professionals, to map where are Lesotho's items, artifacts, collections on the global village. Where are they? So that we know that the skulls are here, the artifacts are here, this university here holds this, or this museum holds this. It's important for us to do that work of mapping where the collections are. Last year, 2024, we were at a conference at Tababosiho, and at the end of the conference, which was hosted by NAL and University of Free State and the British Library, and at the end of it, the participants issued a declaration which was called Tababosiho Declaration. It's on the website. I'll leave the slides with you, Medineo, you can share, and the link is there. But it speaks to the importance. The participants, this was debated a lot until it was made soft in the end, but the participants demanded the repatriation of cultural artifacts wherever they were. But in the end, because there's always a compromise, it was said we call for the repatriation of physical artifacts, be it cultural artifacts, be it physical or digital, yes. But we call for their return. And so as a nation, this calls for us to work together as museums, as archives, as libraries, to really strengthen our voice and our collaboration in calling for the return. The Tababosiho Declaration gives us an instrument to step on, and we can say, we made this declaration as a nation to say we want our records returned. We also have to be active. We have to be active, Mamakwena, in collecting the culture that exists now, so that we are not only talking about the Lozat 1896, but we are talking about the current culture. What are we doing with it? Are we storing it? Are we being careful with it?
Object, and you rightly, Linda, rightly mentioned that these are not just objects. As an archaeologist, it's quite an invasive discipline where Mahwanza is as a weapon against us. So we're trying to decolonize that, and Babana as just objects. So actually these hold souls. It can happen it triggers something in me. So Hagidinki is just objects, they are deeper than that. Like yes, I think some of us have to pray a little bit before we enter a site, because it holds the memories and spiritual souls of our ancestors. Our brain is my inheritance, or patterns or motifs or artistry. So you might find indeed maybe somebody from another distant family was then married into Basotho and actually reproduced that particular artifact. So given the time period, that is how we can make sense of the mask and how this is agree. And just to add, because I know that I have to get into the talk. So really my question about that was not to advocate for this entanglement per se, but to say that perhaps we need to begin thinking about a more transnational framework for repatriation, because it seems to take longer when we're doing it as nations, right? The laga infrastructure and the complexities of the bureaucracy that goes into it. But South Africa, for example, through SARA, has already made steps in that regard that I think we could benefit from. And so sometimes I wonder if we're just kind of complicating things for ourselves by saying when we can kind of benefit from a more transnational framework in that regard.
I wanted this to be an us conversation, and I found that ironic because we're here because we're seeing the item was under King Mushesh, the first day in the UK, And for me, it just, one of the fundamental principles that I feel we learned from him was tabea diplomacy, right? And how diplomacy was one of the reasons why we ended up being a protectorate, and we didn't have it as bad. Yes, colonialism was still as bad for us, but maybe not as equally as South Africa. We can agree on that. So I feel that there's a space for diplomacy. I don't know what that looks like, but there's a place for diplomacy. We cannot discount how serious of an issue this is. It's conflict, right? We want things from people that don't want to return things that belong to us. Diplomacy ke mono mo he re tlo kgonang ho dula fatshe ditafoleng le di owners tsa di museum, whoever their representatives are here, whether they are here or not. But I just wanted to just assert that we must allow space for diplomacy. Maybe these institutions that are set up can assist us in having those conversations. If they're not responding to emails, is there someone that we can reach out who is a lot closer to us, who we have a person-to-person relationship with, that is in a better position or is better suited to have that discussion?
First, you have to get yourself in order. You don't just go to people without knowing what is it that you're going to discuss. B, it is indeed appropriate that you use these missions that exist. I have used the American Embassy for some of the issues that I said I won't discuss here, and it works because I don't have money to go to US to fight, but I could be able to say, hey, your people did 1, 2, 3. What are you doing about it? How are you assisting? But by the time you go there, you have cleared issues in-house first, and be very clear and know how to articulate your case. You understand? So we need to have family meetings first before we go to approach people and say, this is what we want, lest we come across as mediocre.
And I'm saying, where are the common people like me who live in the village in all of this? And you just answered my question a few minutes ago when you said this was a family meeting, because I was going to suggest the dialogue continues, and since you have initiated, then you bear the responsibility to continue. Somebody said things get to a point where they die.
Yes.
So that when the old ones die, the ones that are produced today will carry on the process of remembrance. Since now I agree, I was a bit like, okay, these are going all over. I think the family meeting now will have a better output into the artists, the intellectuals, and the livelihoods. Thank you very much.
We have to ask ourselves the question of how many Basotho actually want these things back? How many of them still feel associated with these items, considering the cultural erasure that they have experienced? Considering that opposes what these things represent. And if we're presented with a scenario where there is tension or resistance towards receiving back these objects, how are we going to tackle that? How do we propose to re-assimilate Tipaena into our culture? Like being cognizant of the fact that what we want returned is not necessarily the object, it's what it signifies. But if what it used to signify to the collective no longer stands, then what are we actually asking for back? And what if the people don't want it back because their Christian beliefs or their religious beliefs just kind of create a tension there? How do we reconcile that?
At Unit London 2 years ago, and the curator in Unit London got us access to the British Museum to interact with some artifacts from our respective countries. And I was shocked when they sent me an email saying, yeah, we have about 600 artifacts from Lesotho. 600, that's a large number. So yeah, I should not say this unlocked a memory. But also, I think one of the beautiful things about curatorial practice and artistic practice and that sort of like intervention. I don't know, for me it ignited an investment in our cultural and heritage objects. And I think that's one of the important things about art. It's a communicator. It bridges, it creates a bridge between different institutions. So I think that's one of the things that we can do, possibly. We are able to break down all the intellectual, scholarly language and I guess translate it into something that I guess could be understood in layman terms. I don't know how we can do it, but I mean, let's work on it. And also speaking to, I went to an art residency in Austria. My studio was inside a museum. And one of the cool things about like my studio door, which is cool but also uncool, it was a glass door, and there was this switch I could flip to make the door either opaque or transparent. And in the contract I signed, we were encouraged to make the door transparent, to basically invite museum visitors to come watch us.
Oh my God. Wow.
Yeah, and it was such an uncomfortable experience to have people behind a glass door watching me work, taking pictures, taking videos. Austria, in a little village called Engelharzel, like close to the border with Germany. I was like maybe one or two black people there. So I got to a point where I would just leave my door open. So like, at least come in, let's talk. And that experience, so uncomfortable. And it's very weird to be observed by people that you know don't get you, don't understand you. So I can only imagine what our brothers and sisters who've been like stored behind a glass wall have been feeling this whole time. Like, your spirit is uneasy, it's not at rest, and you just want to go home.
So I will start by responding to what you're saying. How do we come together? Yes, it is important for us to avoid regurgitating. In March, I attended a conference by, again, Open Restitution Africa, together with University of Western Cape, where we were discussing as Africans again, not with other people, but as Africans, saying, how do we move forward as a collective, instead of working in silos, because others have more muscle than others seem to have more knowledge than others. But if we come together as Africans, Ghana has already moved. South Africa already has a draft that is way advanced, you're right. I have been studying that draft like I am going to write an exam. And it's through their journeys and what they have already done that one learns that we are not crazy to believe that certain artifacts or whatever that needs to return is indeed ours. I'll give you an example. So the example now I'm getting into my discussion. Who am I? I am Mamukwena. I work at Restitution Museum and Archives, and I'm representing an institution that has been there. Yes, it might be almost 70 years old because it started in 1956, but the collection started in the mid or even earlier 1800s. And as I represent this institution, I have a responsibility to correct the mistakes of the past, as much as I have a responsibility, as Mebuhle has said, to keep on collecting. But now, because we have identified that mistakes were made, we also have to consider the term ethics. Ethics is key, is what I would like to talk about. Let's not move to the Western countries before we start here at home. Let's start amongst ourselves. How have we been collecting? Let's look at Restitution Museum and Archives. let's look at what we have in our rooms, or one room, or in our storage. How did we collect that? Did we apply ethics when we were collecting? Because if we start here at home, if you ask me, the spiritual collection at inside Muruja Museum and Archives, how did it come to be? Did someone really donate their bones, the divinity bones? Or did someone convince them that they should give them up? Because they are now Christians. And if you are saying you are giving up this heathen ways, you have to give this to us so that we know that you are. I'm not saying that's what happened. Hey, don't quote me. You camera, don't quote me. But I'm saying there could have been other ways. These are the politics that Mes talked about that we shouldn't be scared to go into, right? Take responsibility. Then we talk about the region, South Africa, Iziko Museum. What is inside Iziko Museum? What is inside Iziko Museum? How was it collected? Did someone have to die before their bracelet was displayed? You know what I'm saying? So before we even go to the Western world, let's look around. South Africa's case becomes easier when you're talking about South Africa and Namibia, because we know the history of South Africa and Namibia, isn't it? The history of South Africa and Namibia is that they were handed over, and Namibia was handed over to South Africa to continue with colonization, isn't it? But we have museums like Iziko. I was there in March, I was there last 2 weeks ago. We're talking about a museum that has boxes of human remains that they don't know what to do with now because they become an albatross. You know, when they become an albatross, it's even more embarrassing. It's even more wrong. We are talking about now, if you need to give back human remains, we are talking about restitution. I won't regurgitate. Mez already told us about restitution being given back to the community, right? So if you are bringing back my great-grandfather that you took many years ago, don't dump my great-grandfather with me when you've already wronged the spirits. Why are you bringing all that mess into my house? Why are you bringing all that mess to come and disturb the peace that is prevailing? Because it is your own, it is the onus is upon you. You're the one that did that, right? So we have to have rituals. We have to do a whole lot of things, right? That need to be considered and be observed upon laying to rest the human remains, isn't it? So the same thing, if now we have, so we end up finding that the bones inside the Norwegian Museum belong to someone in Mokotlo. Are we just going to say, oh, hey, here are your bro, just sign them over that you're giving them to us officially now? A lot of work has to be done, isn't it? The reason I'm giving you this background is now if you go to Western world, you go to Washington, D.C., because as Lineo said, why those 515 items are no longer just at British Museum is because they're all over the world. Last year I did a bit of research. I was working with the London Science Museum to understand where some of those material culture, where they are at. Some of them are as far as Washington, D.C. Some of them are found in Italy. We are still trying to also, it's funny because we work in silos as Africans. We are also trying to do, I like the term that Mebute uses, mapping. I had been calling it putting together inventories, but we actually have to map and identify where these things are. So
I'm saying it's interesting because Kinana, all three of us have independent mappings.
Yes, definitely. That's what we were discussing earlier. So when they return whatever that they need to return, they can't just dump them. So this is where now we separate repatriation also from restitution. I made her laugh earlier without deviating. When I was a teenager in class at NUL, my professor, my favorite human, Professor Mutibe, used to say, "No way, nah. We want reparations." And I was like, oh my goodness, when are we getting
getting this reparations. And I would sit back and imagine South Africa giving us millions of rands because they owe us reparations. But fast track over 30 years, almost 30 years later, or over 30 years later, I was probably I'm way old now, just expose myself. But many years later, I'm beginning to understand how these conversations have been going on for ages. The question is, what are we doing now?
1852, Cathcart attacks King Moshoeshoe and loses as a result. And then in 1854, the British hand over the territory to the Boers, hence the birth of the Orange Free State. And there was the signing of the Sand River Convention. After that, 3 years later, or 4 years later, 1858, war was declared on Basotho in the war Ntwa Senegale, and the Boers lose. They were hurt, they did not like this. In 1861, King Moshoeshoe, continuing from his conversations with the British since 1843, says, okay, this Boer thing is becoming a real problem. I need your help. There was a new commissioner coming in. His name was Wodehouse. And yeah, Philip Wodehouse. King Moshoeshoe then says, hey, I still need your help. These people are becoming a real problem now. I need to guard my territory. This is around the same time that the man Howell comes to Lesotho to come and collect these objects. So one can assume that King Moshoeshoe's logic was, I will give these things as a gesture of diplomacy because I'm still asking for something from the British so that they see that, hey, yes, I am loyal, I can be loyal, but I need your help with these people. And in good faith, you ask me for something, I'll give it back. This James Michael Howell, he was described as a jack of all trades. He started his career as a policeman. At some point, he's a magistrate's assistant, public prosecutor for Natal, attorney, newspaper editor, author, and apparently an art curator too, because he collected these items, right? He was one of the people present during the signing of the first Aliwal North Treaty of 1858 after Ntwa Senegale. That didn't last long, obviously. And he served in the first war between the British and the Zulus in 1835 and 36, but also during 1865, the second Basotho Boer War, he fought against Moshoeshoe because he said that his property was getting damaged, and he just did that to defend his homestead, but he did not agree with the war because he felt that Basotho were being decimated, children were going without food, women were being murdered and treated badly. So I wanted to start this build up to 1861 when these assets, objects, artifacts leave Lesotho to where this conversation sort of began. How did our relationship with the British begin? And how many times had they gone back on their word? It's not said explicitly in history, but you can kind of fill the gaps, right? That you learn afterwards that they were actually aiding the Boers in their fight against us. So on one hand, you're my friend, but on the other, you're giving my enemy arms. Diplomacy. These things come from 1860 something, but even those people who created them for that time learned them from somewhere else that was not preserved. One of the painful things about Western culture is their obsession with immortality. We, in our cultures across Africa, understand that we live with nature. Things are born, they mature, they die. This goes for the materials we use, the things we wear, what we have in our homes, how we build our homes. Therefore, we need to leave room for these things to also die so that other things can emerge. More so because spiritually, as Africans, we know that this is not it. There is beyond and there is before. And with that said, I urge everyone in their little corners to start asking their elders, what do you have in the home? Tatarantumbe mentioned that an elder of his has his boots somewhere for Litamaile in the same manner where a missionary took them here, they go to Cape Town, they end up in France. He, as a family member, would like to see those because these were not just practical shoes for practical everyday wear. The person who made them was an artisan. So he was creating art at that time. It could be that this thing is in a glass case, it could be that it's in a box, it could be that it's on storage compartments 5 floors below the floor. Now, I urge people to ask these questions. There's a thing called epistemic disobedience. We've all been educated according to the Western model of knowledge creation and knowledge sharing. Epistemic disobedience says, yes, you taught me that there was a law of Newton, shove, but my elders knew that when you throw a stone up, it will come down.
Yes.
I will use the Newton logic, but I will bring it back to my people in the language that they spoke, as far as I can access it. This is a long journey. It doesn't end here. Some things are forgotten. Luckily, some of us sleep, we dream, and we remember through those. So thank you so much for being here. Thank you for your time, your attention, your comments, and your encouragement. Thank you.
Everything that we live is a reflection of our humanity. And these artifacts are important for that, to have our humanity reflected back at us. So maybe we can make people understand that for the important